Hello everyone. His name in English means lucky. Perhaps it was not by chance that Luciano chose that nickname for himself. And indeed, luck has always been with him, since he was an immigrant boy wandering the streets of New York, until he passed away at the age of 65. An age that some other American mafia bosses never reached, such as Al Capone or Paul Castellano. At a very young age, Luciano showed his unruly temperament in a society full of crime. He brought his first gun home when he was only 14 years old, then joined the 5 Points gang and traded heroin.in. Determined to rise up in the criminal world in New York, Luciano first Americanized his name from Salvatore Luciano to Charles Luciano. Welcome to Detective TV. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the latest videos. Born in 1897, Charles "Lucky" Luciano immigrated with his family from Italy to New York at the age of 10. Unable to speak English, Luciano struggled in school and began hanging out with gang members. During this time, Luciano opened a protection racket for his schoolmates and was willing to use violence to force his victims to pay. Dropping out of school in 1914, Luciano worked as a clerk for a hat company for $7 a week, the only real job he had in his life. After winning nearly $250 gambling, Luciano quit his job at the hat company and began his criminal career. During this process, Luciano became friends with two Jewish gang members, Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, who would later become important allies of Luciano. In 1916, Luciano was arrested for the first time for selling heroin. After only 6 months in reform school, Luciano continued to delve deeper into the path of crime. 4 years later, he became a hired gun for Joe Masuria, a gang leader in Lower Manhattan. In the 1920s, Luciano took advantage of the prohibition in the United States to focus on bootlegging. Together with 5 other bootleggers, Luciano dominated the entire East Coast of the United States. Luciano's illegal revenue during this time was estimated at $12 million a year, of which he pocketed $4 million. In the late 1920s, New York was engulfed in a bloody turf war between Joe Masuria and Salvatore Maranzano, another mafia boss. Masuria and Maranzano were part of a generation of traditional mafia bosses who began their criminal careers in Italy and then moved to the United States. They were suspicious of people from different backgrounds and wanted to preserve the values of the old mafia world, such as honor, tradition, and dignity. On the contrary, Luciano had socialized with friends from many places since childhood, so he was willing to join hands with people from different backgrounds, as long as he could make money. He wanted to establish a national crime organization that would allow Italian, Jewish, and Irish gangs to pool resources to build a criminal network that would benefit all parties. While expanding his territory, Luciano made many enemies. On October 17, 1929, he was kidnapped by his rivals and taken to Staten Island, New York, where he was beaten and stabbed many times all over his body. As is customary in the Mafia, they leave their victims to die slowly and painfully. Miraculously, Luciano survived with his face covered in scars. After this horrific incident, Lucky Luciano found a position behind New York mob boss Joe "the Boss" Masuria. However, he and his gang became increasingly dissatisfied with traditional Italian gangs, like Masuria, who were old-fashioned, spoke little English, and operated in small groups. Next on Luciano's hit list was Masuria's arch-rival, Maranzano. By this time, Maranzano had become the first godfather, Capo di tutti capi, or boss of bosses, the leader of all organized crime in New York. Luciano knew that Masuria and Maranzano were the two stumbling blocks to his dream. Luciano believed that the greed and conservatism of traditional mafia bosses were what kept the Italian gangs poor while the Jewish and Irish gangs prospered. In early 1931, Luciano secretly worked for a rival gang as the battle for territory became increasingly unfavorable for his side. After reaching a secret agreement with Maranzano, Luciano invited Boss Masuria to dinner at a restaurant in the Brooklyn district on April 15, 1931. In the middle of a game of cards, Luciano asked to go to the bathroom. Seconds later, gunmen arranged by Luciano burst in and shot Masuria and his bodyguard to death. With no rivals, Maranzano divided the Italian gangs into 5 mafia families, with himself as the highest. The new boss brought Mafia laws from his homeland to impose on all Mafia families in New York. Maranzano also curbed the criminal activities of competing Mafia organizations to benefit his family. On the surface, Luciano seemed to accept the changes, but inwardly he concluded that Maranzano was even more greedy and conservative than Mafia. Luciano secretly looked for an opportunity to eliminate Maranzano. In September 1931, Luciano learned from a spy that he had become a target for assassination on Maranzano's orders. Luciano decided to strike first. According to spy information, Maranzano was about to be suddenly audited by the Internal Revenue Service, so he asked his guards not to carry guns in the office to avoid trouble. This detail prompted Luciano to devise a plan to assassinate Maranzano. To carry out the plan, Luciano recruited 4 Jewish gang members with the help of Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. On September 10, 1931, 4 assassins came to Maranzano's office under the guise of Internal Revenue Service employees. These men did not look Italian, so Maranzano did not suspect them at all. 4 assassins then disarmed the guards and murdered Maranzano with the spy's tip-off. After Maranzano's death, Luciano became the most powerful crime boss in America. Although he could have called himself Boss of Bosses, Luciano abandoned the title, believing it was a source of conflict between crime families and fearing it would be targeted by another ambitious person. By late 1931, increasingly tired of the bloodshed and influenced by his close associate Lansky, Luciano believed that the Mafia, which the gangs called Cosa Nostra, could be run as an organized enterprise, rather than just a brutal, murderous gang. This prompted him to hold a major meeting in Chicago with the Italian bosses of 4 New York gangs. There, Luciano revolutionized the structure, giving birth to the modern American Mafia. To avoid future bloodshed, Luciano divided the gangs into families. Each family has its own sphere of operation, following an agreed set of rules, similar to a business. In addition, each member of the Mafia must keep quiet about their activities according to an unwritten rule called the Omerta. An overarching governing body called the Council maintains harmony between families and resolves any disputes. By applying the corporate mindset to organized crime, Luciano laid the foundation for the Mafia to control gambling, prostitution, drugs, etc. throughout the 20th century. Luciano is considered the father of organized crime in the United States. On December 5, 1933, the U.S. government revoked alcohol prohibition. But before that, Lucky Luciano, Meyer Lansky, and the new generation of Mafia bosses had already considered diversifying their business methods. Luciano and Meyer seized the opportunity to control the casinos, taking over from the old bosses who had passed their prime, and at the same time encroached on horse racing betting, prostitution, and heroin trafficking. The profits were immediately circulated and laundered through real estate business. Beyond the times, the pair together with Siegel established a contract killing company, equipped with modern weapons, ready to carry out any contract. Another area where Lucky Luciano demonstrated his superior organizational ability, establishing a syndicate for the organization including all the brothels in New York, in which all the prostitutes who were members were forced to pay a quota of profits. In the early 1930s, Luciano lived a lavish life in New York. But those good days did not last long because Luciano was targeted by Thomas Dewey, the special prosecutor assigned to investigate organized crime. After the peak came the abyss. It was when Luciano was making the most money from his organized crime activities that his nemesis, prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey, appeared. He organized a special raid through 80 brothels across New York, interrogating hundreds of prostitutes and madams, collecting enough evidence to prosecute Luciano. At that time, Luciano was temporarily in hiding due to problems related to the assassination of a big gangster named Dutch Schultz. He had been arrested before and was released on bail of only $5,000. However, Dewey heard the news. He shouted to everyone involved that America's #1 criminal had just been released on bail, and Luciano was arrested again. From then on, Luciano began to spend huge sums of money, hiring the best lawyers to defend him. During the cross-examination, Prosecutor Dewey pointed out many inconsistencies in Luciano's testimony, causing him to sweat and respond with weak, "don't know," or "don't remember." Based on tax records from 1929 to 1935, Dewey pointed out that Luciano's declared annual income was only about $22,500, in contrast to the boss's lavish lifestyle. In front of the jury, Luciano stammered and could not explain. In the end, Luciano and his co-defendants were convicted of forcible prostitution and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. At first, Luciano still tried to operate the Mafia family's criminal network from prison. After his appeal was rejected by the Federal Supreme Court in 1938, Luciano let his subordinates take over. However, no one expected that World War II would become his salvation. Several American warships were attacked by German submarines, culminating in the sinking of the newly built Normandy in the Hudson River. The American military suspected espionage, but had no way to solve it. And Meyer Lansky, still at large, came to his old friend's rescue. He sent word to the head of the U.S. Naval Intelligence that Lucky Luciano, in his position, was the best person to expose the spies. In return, Luciano would have his sentence reduced when the war ended. A great deal of darkness was struck. Luciano ordered his men to report any suspicious activity at the docks to the American authorities. He also made sure that the dock workers would not go on strike. It took Luciano just a few weeks to have his men capture the German spy and hand him over to the army. Then, following the victorious armies, on February 10, 1946, Luciano was stripped of his American citizenship, forced to board a ship back to his native Italy, and placed under house arrest in Naples. Another crime boss, Paul Castellano, was the last to say goodbye to him. To this day, the extent of Luciano's contribution to the victory of the war is still debated. After a short stay in Italy, Luciano fled to Havana, Cuba, and attempted to build a criminal network with the help of Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. Not long after, Luciano was deported from Cuba to Italy in 1947 under pressure from the U.S. government. Suspected of drug trafficking, in 1954, Luciano was placed under close surveillance by the Italian police for 2 years. The former boss had to report to the police every week, stay home every night, and was not allowed to leave Naples without permission. Luciano's influence over the Mafia in the U.S. also waned. In 1957, Luciano saw his American Mafia family taken over by others without being able to intervene. At the end of his life, Luciano wanted to share his life story with the public. However, the former Mafia boss died of a heart attack on January 26, 1962, after meeting the filmmaker. Only then was Luciano's body allowed to return to the U.S. for burial.
Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. And as always, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments below. See you in the next one.